Hi, I'm standing at the bottom of Harcourt Hill on Monday the 23rd of March, and this is my 7th Springwalk video, and I've come down here because there's a particular plant that I know grows just in this little area, and I wanted to say something about it and show something special about its growth at this time of year. I'm going to walk up the hill a bit and then talk about it though, because the traffic noise is quite irritating here. Right, I hope that will do it. I'm a little bit further up the hill now, and that was the bus coming from the Brookes University campus at the top of Harcourt Hill. And the plant I want to talk about is interesting because it's very old, and it has a different sort of life cycle from flowering plants, and is one that you may not be familiar with, and it's something called a horsetail, and the name is nothing to do with the sort of horsetails you find in Dick Francis novels. The plant is, well, it's more closely related to ferns than to flowering plants or even conifers. It doesn't have seeds, for example, and it certainly doesn't have flowers. But there are various interesting things about it. The Latin name is equisetum, which means horsehair, and there are various species of this in Britain, some preferring drier ground than others. And I think the one I've found is something called the field horsetail, Equisetum arvense, and arvense apparently comes from a Latin word for ploughed ground. And that's sort of appropriate because the plant apparently likes rough ground and roadsides, as well as other spots such as gardens. As I say, there are other species. These have names like marsh horsetail, water horsetail, and wood horsetail. And I'm not enough of an expert to be able to distinguish between them, but what I'm going to say applies to all horsetails anyway, as far as I know. They have a variety of common names, not all of which are something or other horsetail. And one of them is scouring rush, and that apparently is because of one of their old-time uses. They were used as pan scourers. Now most plants, if you grab, say, the primroses here, or the violets that I started this clip with, or the daffodils, if you grab a handful of those and try scouring the burnt egg off the inside of your saucepan. Maybe it's egg and nettles if you've been following the cooking suggestions I made in a video about 3 days ago. You won't get very far. The plants will just go soggy, and you'll be left with a slightly more messy saucepan than before. Horsetails, however, are allegedly different. I haven't actually tried this myself, because the stems contain a lot of silica, silicon dioxide, and as anybody who's played with sand or quartz crystals knows, silicon dioxide is hard and scratchy. In fact, the dry weight of horsetails can apparently be up to 25% silica, and you have to ask, why does any plant want so much of this inert material? And the answer is structural rigidity. It keeps the plant up. Even quite tough plants such as hollyhocks and sunflowers, if you push them down, the stems will probably collapse. And horsetails are a lot tougher than that. Again, I've not tried it personally, but that's what I'm told, because of the silica. The other interesting thing about them, which connects with this, as I already said, is that they're old. The first horsetails, I think, date from the beginning of the Carboniferous era, when the plants that are now coal were growing, and that beginning was about 300 million years ago. 300 million years ago. So these plants have been around for a long time, and at the beginning wood hadn't been invented, or at least most plants hadn't invented wood, and the horsetails found a different means of keeping themselves up. Wood is one way of keeping yourself up if you're a tree. Impregnating yourself with silica is another, and that's what the horsetails did. And I'll just add one disclaimer, which is that I've read that one particular kind of horsetail had in fact invented wood, sort of similar in structure to trees, though maybe not identical. But most of them used silica instead. Okay, well, so there's using them as scouring rushes, and there's extreme age, and I always feel rather sad when I pass horsetails. I'll show you some in a minute, and you'll see that they're really not very big. But once upon a time, there were much bigger horsetails. There were giant horsetails compared with what we have now. Tree-size ones, somewhere between 100 and 160 feet high. I looked up some common trees, and that is apparently about 2/3 the height of a willow. So that's pretty impressive compared to what we have now. And I think it's rather sad that none of that exists anymore. Maybe the woolly mammoth people, the ones who are trying to bring back various extinct animals, will turn to plants one day. So now I'll explain what in particular I was looking for. I knew that there was I remembered that there was a little stand of horsetails, just a yard or so, maybe a bit more, near the bottom of Harcourt Hill. And I came to see something connected with their life cycle. If you've ever looked at a fern, then on the underside of the leaves, fronds rather, on the underside of the fronds, or the back of the fronds, at certain times of year, you'll see dark brown circles or splodges containing a sort of powdery substance. And that's how the ferns reproduce. The powdery substance is spores, and the spores land on the ground and then they germinate. In this case, they germinate into not a fern, but another free living sort of plant, which is more like a moss, something that's technically called a prothallus. And then some other things happen, and eventually you get a new fern. So those are spores, and they're not seeds, as any gardener will know. Horsetails have a similar arrangement, and there are two kinds of horsetail stem. For most of the year, or most of the active part of the year, what you see is long green stems with circlets, sort of crowns of little stems coming off them, one and then another and then another until you get to the top. And those are what are called sterile stems. They're green and they get the plant energy by photosynthesis, but they have nothing to do with reproduction. However, before the sterile stems come out, before they emerge from the ground in the year, you get another kind of stem, which is technically called a fertile stem. And it's easy to believe that this doesn't belong to a horsetail when you first see it, because it looks more like a fungus. It's basically sort of whitish cones, little whitish cones with brown bits inside. And the brown bits, as with the ferns, are spore containers. And the spores grow in the same sort of way. They fall onto the ground and form this free-living prothallus thing, and then eventually you get a new horsetail. And I knew that the fertile stems occurred in the spring, so I thought I would come up here as soon as I could, in case I was near the end of their time. But I think actually I may be too early rather than too late, because I haven't been able to find any. What I did find is the stems, is some of the sterile stems from last year's horsetails, so I will have something to show you. Okay, well, I've been on previous walks up and down Harcourt Hill, and I've got various videos showing the posh houses, so I shan't bother with that this time. I'm going to go and brave the traffic noise now and find the horsetails to show you. So now I'm walking down Harcourt Hill, and it will shortly curve to the left and then join a sort of feeder road that leads around a housing estate, which is where I'll walk back and then probably down to Willow Lane and along Willow Lane to Oseney Mead. It's lovely to see the primroses. Now, I'll just add a caution. Those things are not horsetails. They're a flowering plant. And I was just feeling them to see how sticky they are. There's one plant that looks a bit similar but has sort of sticky leaves called goosegrass. And those are not that, I think, but they have the same sort of general body plan. And they're not horsetails. Now I'll show you some horsetail sterile stems from last year. As you see, there aren't very many of them here, and I was lucky to find the spot again. I knew they'd be around somewhere. There are horsetails elsewhere in Oxford, for example in the woods at the base of Harcourt Hill. This is a dead, sterile horsetail stem. And this is another. These things, by the way, are not leaves. They're little stems. The leaves apparently are reduced to tiny sheaths around these bits, the so-called nodes, and they don't photosynthesize. Photosynthesis comes through the big stem and these little stems, both of which are green. When the new ones of these appear, you'll see that they start off having a lovely fresh spring green, and They have a lovely regular shape. This one's quite battered, obviously, but it's very striking to see them together. So this, in Britain at any rate, and as far as I know in most of the world, is almost all that remains of a once great branch of plants that used to grow to almost the size of willow trees, and that, if you've ever heard a coal train passing, I don't know whether coal trains still do pass, some of this thing's early cousins, much bigger than this, might be embedded in the coal that the train is carrying. I think there are a few different genera, genuses, though that's not the right plural. I think there are a few different genera of the prehistoric giant horsetails, and the one that I've seen most about is called Calamites. I think that's right, Calamites. Look it up, and there are plenty of artists' impressions of the Carboniferous forests with these giant trees. So look it up and see how far we have now fallen. That is all that remains. See you next time.